Hello and welcome back to Downtime Activities, and welcome to another short discussion video where Will and I are going to sit across from each other and have a conversation about something. We have our bonus action series. That's kind of our podcast style video series. They tend to be an hour or more. These are a video kind of series we started doing that are a little shorter, a little less long-winded. That's just a topic that we discuss for a little bit that we think merits a discussion, RPG and storytelling related.
There's lots of stuff we want to talk about that we don't feel like either we can stretch out to talk about for an hour or don't necessarily have the desire to. But they're topics that we kind of feel like need to be covered to some degrees. And I think this one fits pretty well into that category.
And I think it's something that we as a group have done great and terrible at in the past, and probably most groups and most DMs have. And that is the conversation about character builds / concepts and how you let them shine as a DM. How do you let the effort and the thought that the players put into coming up with that translate to the game so they feel gratified in that regard?
And I think obviously like this is a pretty easy thing to do with backstories. At least if you like have good players who are, or like you're working closely with your players and coming up with kind of interesting backstories, or at least like fairly detailed backstories for all your characters. It's pretty easy to let those shine and let those pop up throughout the campaign, whether it's characters from their past or goals that character has. But it's kind of a harder thing to do when it comes to character builds and sort of character concepts. But it's something that I think is very important to do as a game master, is find space, and usually more than just once, for those character builds, for those character concepts to actually have their place. For example, a character concept that I've been working on a lot recently is kind of a cavalier character. I want to fight as much as possible on horseback. I'm kind of tailoring the build in that direction. Because I think there's ways to kind of stack a couple of abilities in kind of a cool way that kind of makes sense. And it's something we haven't done much.
Not much.
Is in the vast majority of our games. And when the time comes that I play that character, I don't want every single combat over the course of the entire game to take place in a 5-foot wide tunnel or indoors. But obviously that is going to happen. I can't expect every combat in the game to be tailored to my build. But I also hope that there will be plenty of combats where I can actually use that build. Exactly. And that just made me sort of realize that, like, as a game master, it's very important to pay attention to what your players are building as their characters, what their kind of concepts are, and build moments into combats and build moments into social encounters and stuff like that to actually let those matter.
And I think this is typically a pretty easy thing to do if you are being thoughtful about it throughout the game. For instance, with the Cavalier style character, it's not hard to let there be combats that are in an open field and the Cavalier gets to maneuver around on horseback and that comes in a really useful way. It's pretty easy to do that if you're thinking of it. And I think that's the first and most important step. As a DM, don't just make encounters that you think are interesting. Make encounters you think are interesting that interact interestingly with the characters that you have in front of you. Take their abilities into consideration. If you have a illusion wizard, for instance, this is a bit of a touchy subject, design a dungeon, a section of a dungeon that specifically illusion magic can interact with in a really cool way, and then their illusionist gets to really shine in that moment. And this is kind of like, it's both a thing you have to be careful with, but also you have to be thoughtful and do. Because like we said, if we make every single combat in an open field and the exact way that your Cavalier character is designed to be at their peak performance is every single combat, then they might feel overpowered or unbalanced, or they might constantly be getting to use this thing, and other people might feel like they're lagging behind. But if it's something that happens regularly but not every time, people get to see you shine, but people also get to shine in different ways in different encounters.
And all of a sudden the fighter in the party with the sort of, tunnel fighter build and the kind of sentinel, meant to hold down a hallway, that character all of a sudden feels completely ignored and useless. And, every single combat being tailored towards the Cavalier character is going to be boring for the Cavalier character as well as the rest of the party. And it doesn't force that character to solve problems in interesting ways because this isn't how they normally fight. This isn't where they're at their best. And that's, part of the point of the game is having to solve problems in interesting ways because, things aren't set up exactly the way you would want them to be. That's why there has to be that mix there. But there has to actually be those moments where that character can use those abilities and can shine. And we're not just talking about combat builds here.
Absolutely.
If a character is built as a social infiltrator, make plenty of moments over the course of the campaign where they can make use of those skills. They can actually take the time to prepare and, build these false identities for themselves and, ingratiate themselves with the nobility of a certain city to, try and solve a certain quest line or get a hold of a certain item in sort of their particular way. If a character builds, a tracker, give them things to track over the course of the campaign. They'll probably go out of their way to find them anyway, but it's important as a DM to, make these sort of big set-piece moments, I think, to let that character be the one to step forward and be like, haha!
Use that tracker. And you mentioned something there that I think is also a pretty important thing to pick up there, which is that players who have an idea or a build are going to, or at least should, find opportunities to try and use those abilities because that's the whole thing that they were thinking of when they were mechanically sometimes building their character. And as a DM, you need to be willing and lenient in that, but also reasonable and realistic in that. So, for instance, if there's a problem that you didn't intend for them to solve with their tracking abilities or their social infiltration abilities, you didn't think of that when you were kind of setting up your notes.
Tracking a weretoad in the sewers through smell.
Exactly. Right. Rolls happen. These things they roll well enough, these things can happen. But, don't make it so it just doesn't work because it's not what you foresaw as the right way to solve the problem. Give them an opportunity to use this ability that they want to be really good at to make this a really good opportunity for them to shine. However, be reasonable at the same time. And if a player just puts everything into just always being able to roll a 35 on this one skill check, they can't use that skill to solve every single problem, even if they try to. If they are trying to ingratiate themselves with a noble, it's going to be very hard for them to use the survival skill to do that.
Right.
They'd have to be very creative to find a way that tracking can apply to a social interaction. And so if there's no reasonable way that can be done, they can't just keep kind of fudging and finding some backwards way to always get to roll the one thing that they know their character is exceptional at. And that goes back to that, you want people to shine and do the thing they're great at, but you also want to put them in a situation where they suck, typically, and they have to think creatively to become good or able to solve the problem.
And, we're not necessarily huge fans of, purposefully building your party to sort of fulfill every traditional party role and make sure, somewhere down the line you've got every skill covered in terms of proficiency. Your party should build the characters they want to play, and there's inevitably going to be some overlap there. There's inevitably going to be some holes, and that's fun. That's part of what makes a campaign interesting. But players will also build very different characters, and characters with quite different specializations. So by throwing characters into situations they're bad at, quite often gives other characters a chance to shine in that same way. Even if you're not sort of hitting the specific high point of someone's build or the specific high point of someone's concept. But it gives space for everybody to kind of be an important character. And that's very, or should be very central to just the philosophy of being a game master. Absolutely. Is giving all of the players, their space to kind of feel important and their space to shine. No character wants to feel like they're playing second fiddle to another character.
You don't want to be a background character.
Right.
You don't want to be set dressing to everybody else's story, right? I think there is a taking this too far, though, and there is kind of another end of this, which is an important thing to discuss, and that is while I said, talking about like as a DM, you should be taking your players' capabilities into account every time you create an encounter and you're creating things for them to interact with. That doesn't mean every single combat and every single social encounter and every single exploration encounter that you come up with has to be tailored for one of them to shine.
Right.
Because, what you talked about, if nobody's good at the obvious answer to a problem, that's where creativity starts to thrive. So it's making sure you hit that beat for each person multiple times throughout the campaign, that you are being intentional and giving them a chance to shine, but also at times having a situation that nobody has an obvious answer to, and you're giving them that opportunity to collaboratively think of a out-of-the-box solution to solve it.
And of course, you can, if you're doing this well, if you're giving every character, their times to shine and allowing every character's build and concepts to be front and center, you can, within that, occasionally put characters into a situation that are intended for somebody else's build.
Mm-hmm.
But the Cavalier character is almost certainly going to have a high animal handling skill. They know how to control a mount. That's part of who that character is. But forcing some other character at another points of the campaign to make a whole bunch of vital animal handling checks, and having the Cavalier character sitting there like, why aren't I the one? Why aren't I here? Why aren't I the one doing this?
Or better yet, making them have to make animal handling checks because the Cavalier is imprisoned somewhere and they have to ride the Cavalier's horse to go there and save him.
Exactly.
And have to convince this staunch warrior horse to go to charge to this location when it's not the usual way.
Or it makes complete sense as to why that character's in that situation, but now they're having to do something that's tailored to the skill set of another character, but you want to very strongly avoid those situations if you haven't given those other characters their time to shine. If the Cavalier character has never actually got to use their horse in combat, has never gotten to make any animal handling checks over the course of the whole game, and then you allow another character to make a bunch of very important animal handling checks, that's going to feel very personal.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's really not going to sit well with at least that player and very likely anybody at the table, and that's a situation you want to completely avoid.
Yeah.
You can only get away with it if you're giving that space for those characters to shine already. You're just... it kind of serves as a way to highlight why that character is good at a certain thing, and why they're the ones who normally make these roles.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot of fun just by itself, and it is going to once again give rise to that kind of creative problem solving.
Absolutely. You don't want the one tracking check that's made in the first 5 level ups of play to be done by the person who's not trying to make a tracker character.
Right.
And then make that person be like, why did I invest all this into this ability to do this really well if I'm never going to get to do it? This feels targeted. At the same time, we are kind of discussing this pretty blanket statement as if almost everyone in the party has a pretty specific build or concept.
Right.
And there's times where people have very interesting characters, but mechanically they're fairly, I don't want to say generic, but they haven't put a bunch of weird mishmash abilities to make this build. There's I want to play a barbarian. I want to play a berserker barbarian who gets angry and smashes stuff. And that's my character mechanically, but I have this interesting backstory. You can bring backstory into it, but it's hard to let them shine at a niche thing if they're not building their character around a niche thing. However, this mentality goes across the board to pretty much any mechanic in the game that every class by default will be good at.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, you have a character playing that berserker barbarian who doesn't really have a whole lot of weird mechanical shift around to it. It's just somebody who's a furious warrior on the battlefield. Give them an opportunity to make a massively important strength check to hold the gates shut as the bar snaps and the army is trying to rush in. Them by themselves kind of pressing up against, giving them that strength check opportunity, things like that coming up, and them getting to be oh, my super buff barbarian gets to hold the line and gets people shout about how cool that was later on. They still get their chance to shine. You can find those even for mechanically less complex characters.
Well, and that's why we're not
less specific characters.
Right, and that's why we're not just talking about builds here, in that sort of specific statistical sense, but character concepts. If a player makes a unique character for whatever reason, be it class combination or the description of the character or their backstory, or the particular way they're using what few abilities they have, that it should be recognized as unique by NPCs in the world. If you're playing that, this gigantic, furious barbarian from the north, his build may not be anything interesting, but he himself might be viewed as interesting by NPCs, by nobility that you're interacting with, by, other factions and stuff like that. And that's a good enough way for that to let that character shine and to make that player feel recognized. Because, it's like, oh, I've made a character that's not, isn't going to just blend into the background of any of these scenes that we're interacting with. And the NPCs are acting in a way that's like, who's the 8-foot-tall guy back there?
Exactly.
And that's, concepts by themselves are a good enough reason to, to sort of call that out, to be treated as unique, to let... to make players feel recognized. If a character's playing a former soldier, and just even if it's just a former soldier, basic fighter build, sword and board, working his way up towards heavy armor, exactly. That's an excellent character to introduce a whole side arc of, a noble family looking for someone to tutor their son in use of arms, or
running into old war buddies.
Absolutely. Or running into old war enemies, people who fought on the other side in the other war, and they're like, I recognize the insignia on that shield, I've heard about you. Or rogues make excellent, fencing instructors, and a rogue player who uses a rapier is gonna have an excellent time through this whole story arc of them being a tutor for this, noble son, or for the prince who's, trying to learn to use a blade. And especially when characters have unique weapon proficiencies, or if you're a game master and you've homebrewed unique weapons or unique fighting styles, letting the players sort of serve as instructors in that to NPCs, or or people who are actively seeking out player characters because of their unique skill sets. Even if it's not, giving that player a way to, make their build really shine in combat or an important series of social encounters, it's giving them a place where they feel recognized and where they feel important. Yes,
it's giving them the spotlight in a way that will be very gratifying to them. And that's kind of the kind of end all be all of the advice, I think, for this is be thoughtful about what your players are playing and give everybody a chance to shine regularly. It doesn't always have to be targeted and specific and tailor-made, but give lots of opportunity for players to do the thing their character is good at and feel good about
and
that.
And in those sort of throwaway moments, those throwaway encounters and stuff where you hadn't intended a certain player to shine, if you find a player making excellent use of an element of their sort of character build or character concept to really work their way through a problem or really work their way through an encounter, lean into that, and just sort of double down on that character, taking advantage of those skills that they have in an interesting and unique way.
I think that's a decent place for us to stop. Make interesting characters and DMs. Let them be interesting.
Yeah.
Everyone needs their chance to shine. We all want to have that cool moment. There's a lot of ways to do it. Spam calls. There's a lot of ways to do it. I guess we will see you all in the next videos that we release here. Outro time. So go for it. Slay check-ins, sling spells, roll dice, and enjoy your downtime activities.